Dr. Chaitanya Prakash Yogi, Director of the Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center at the Consulate General of India in Durban, Professor Sushma Yadav, Ms. Cheryl Banwarila, Mr. Piyush Khandelwal, distinguished guests and audience members, welcome to today's program of International Day of Democracy. We would like to now welcome our next guest speaker, Professor Sushma Yadav. Professor Sushma Yadav is presently the Vice Chancellor of the Bhagat Pul Singh Malia Vishwa Vidyalaya, Kanpur, Kalan, Sonipat, Haryana, and member of Press Council of India and a member of UGC. Prior to this, she was the Vice Chancellor of Indian Gandhi National Open University, New Delhi, Professor of Public Policy and Governance at the Indian Institute of Public Administration, New Delhi, member of University Grant Commission, Chair Professor of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Chair at the IIPA. A topper of the Delhi University, Professor Sushma Yadav has published several research papers. Professor Sushma Yadav has authored and edited more than 12 books. Professor Sushma Yadav is a member of the Academic Council, Executive Council of various central and state universities, also a member of the Ethic Committees of the AIIMS and Dr. Ram Manohar Lohia Hospital. Professor Sushma Yadav is a recipient of a number of prestigious awards. She has also visited a number of countries like China, USA, Germany, Spain, Peru, Chile, Nepal, Bangladesh for academic administration and training assignments. We would like to now welcome Professor Sushma Yadav for her remarks on the day of International Day of Democracy. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Srishti Hari Narayan. That's right. I wish to compliment first Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center at Consulate General of India, Durban, South Africa. And the director, Dr. Chaitanya Prakash Yogi ji, Shri Piyush Khandelwal ji, Ms. Srishti Hariharan ji. I extend my heartfelt greetings to the world community and the Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center on the International Day of Democracy. The day reminds us of the struggles that the world and various countries in the world have launched to attain democracy. Democracy has not been easy to be achieved by most of the countries and then to sustain in most of the developing countries or the third world, as we call it. Very fortunate nations have survived with democracy and sustained democracies. And I can say with pride, India is one of them. And I represent this country here. And I would like to share with all those who are joining this program how democracy has been there in India for very long as a treasure, as a legacy, and as a way of life which we have sustained over the years. In modern times, we all know democracy is for the people, by the people, of the people, which means people are at the heart of democracy. And that is what makes democracy the best kind of political regime or the best kind of system of governance anywhere in the world. Thus, it is a system where people are responsible for choosing their rulers or representatives and thus are responsible for their fate also. They cannot say what we've got is bad because they have chosen the bad. So they are responsible, and that is why it is the most preferred form of government also. It is a pattern in which freedom, equality, and fraternity or brotherhood are the basic principles of governance. Historically, I would like to remind here, the democratic system of governance in India has been visible since the earliest times, which are called Vedic times in India. At that time, democratic system was evolving or had evolved already. I think a lot of historical research needs to be done to know our roots back, because there was a long spell of foreign aggression, foreign rule, and then colonial rule, which has diminished or put the history back. But the history that we have shows us that democracy was there in ancient times, and I'll share that with the very distinguished guests of today's program and the audience which is with us. In ancient times, in Rig Veda and Atharvaveda, which is the most ancient texts of the world, we find the mention of sabhas and samitis. The sabha and samiti were the decision-making assemblies of that time. In these assemblies or their meetings, a decision was made after discussion with the king, his ministers, and scholars of the time, the Raj Purohits or the Raj Gurus or the Pandits, as they were called. This shows how politics was at that time, because people together used to settle or decide the cases, the problems, and find solutions to them with a collective vision. And the collective vision is usually a wise and good vision. And that's how decisions were taken. Even people with different not ideologies, in fact, because they are the modern names, but different perspectives on life, were divided into various groups and would take a decision after discussion and mutual consultation. So consensual way was always preferred in India instead of conflicts, but democracy remained at the heart of this. Occasionally, we found conflicts also. There were conflicts of ideas between different people because there are different mindsets, there are different thinking patterns. And Indian civilization has believed always, munde munde matir bhinna. Every mind has a different thinking. And those should be put together for having a good way of life, or the democratic way of life, as it is called. So if we look at the functioning of these assemblies, it will not be wrong to say that the beginning of bicameral legislation, as we see in modern times, can also be seen in the Vedic period. Even the selection of Indra, whom we called the ancient lord, or the ancient Raja, or the ancient Devendra, we call him, which means the king of kings. So he was heading an assembly of kings. The selection of Indra was also due to these committees during that Vedic period. The Sabha, the Samitis, had a very, very important role in the election of Indra and in the functions being assigned to the king of that time. Although it was a monarchy, but the monarchy also functioned in consensual form and with deliberation among the people and organizations. He was the king of kings, but the word republic comes even in Rig Veda at least 40 times, and at least 9 times it occurs in Atharva Veda. And then if we go beyond, in Brahman texts, it comes many, many times, which means these assemblies were living, these assemblies were functioning, and that was the way of governing or the way of functioning of the state at that time. After the decline of Vedic era, we find that the monarchs emerged and the government also became a bit different. But I'll go back to Rig Veda because that's the beginning of democracy in India. And it was so committed to democratic principles and ideals that they also made democracy a deity and called it Sangyana, Samagyana. The term Samagyana means the collective consciousness of the people, which Rousseau, much later in the beginning of democratic consciousness in Europe, called the general will. It's that collective consciousness. The word samgyana refers to that. And that shows how evolved the democratic thinking and democratic functioning was during the ancient Vedic times in India. This is the national mind to which the individual mind is to pay its homage as the source from which it derives its potency or power or authority or legitimacy. And the hymn, which is addressed to Samgyana in Rig Veda, has often been sung in different assemblies in India. I remember in our college, we used to have a morning assembly where we used to sing this hymn. And that is, that shows how pervasive it was. It says, people must gather in their assembly, Sangachadvam, they must walk together. Samvadadvam, they must speak in one voice. Sammanaha, samvo manaha, they must also have a union of minds and also union of hearts. Samchittam, of policy. Sammantraha, they must have the same policy or the same decisions. And of hopes and aspirations. Samvo vakuti. Akuti refers to this. So the whole hymn talks about a democratic way of living, a democratic way of thinking, a democratic way of functioning. So, and that shows it was very much in the social living at that time. It was taken to depend on the inner unity of its citizens and their emotional integration, which we try to aspire for now in modern democracies. It was working at that time. The democratic principle was at work in different fields of life, especially the public life, political, social, and cultural, and it governed the entire growth of Indian polity through those ages. I won't say there were no monarchies. There were monarchies also at that time, but even the monarchies were limited. I won't say constitutional because constitution is a new word, but I'm sure when we have more research, we'll find that there was something like constitution also in those Vedic times, which governed all these assemblies. So even the pattern of monarchy remained fundamentally democratic because people always had the right to rebel against a bad ruler, a ruler who would not follow dharma or who would not keep the welfare of people at the center stage, could have been exiled, could have been rebelled against, or could have been expelled by the people. They would leave his place or they'll force the ruler to leave that state. That was the right given in our entire philosophy. And the people formed the appropriate associations and groups to exercise their rights in self-government in ascending order. The Kula, called the clan, the Shreni, called the guild, the Pura, or that called village community, and the Janapada, which is called the state at that time. And that shows that there was a hierarchy of, or there was an ascending order of the organizations which would link people to the democratic top. So top and bottom of the society were linked through these organizations. Each group had its own rules and regulations and was working for democracy or goodwill or general good at its respective spectrum of self-government. Some of the ancient Janapadas were republican in form, which is well known now in history, and some of the Janapadas were monarchical also. But each of them often had an assembly, Samiti, the precursor of the modern parliament, which was attended by the high and low together with a view of taking decisions about the affairs of the state. Professor R.K. Mukherjee, a prominent historian of India, remarked after going through all this literature, side by side with monarchy, and I quote, "There also developed the regular republican type of polity of which glimpses are given in different literary texts, the Brahmanical, the Buddhist, and the Jain literature. The Mahabharata also mentions some republics called Sanghatana. 5 republican unions were called Andhakas, Vrishnis, Yadavas, Kukuras, and Bhojas. These were great republics of the time of Mahabharata, about which we find a great history. They also constituted a Sangha or union with the Sangh Mukhya as the union president. Similarly, in the Mahabharata, we also find a reference to Ganas, called republics, being governed by their councils of leaders called Ganamukhyas. All these Ganas had an extremely democratic constitution. Each had its own assembly. And if we go into the Buddhist texts, we find that these Ganas or republics used to function in a very democratic way. It's like a modern democracy because they also have words coined for vote, the counting of votes, the sitting of the parshads, or the sitting of the councillors of these assemblies or the assemblymen, which shows that the republics were, in fact, functional democracies or functional republics. The Republican confederations known during Mahabharata times were Vajji, called Vriji also, consisting of 9 Mallakis or 9 Lichavis and 18 Ganarajyas. This is what history tells us of Kashi, Koshal, and other states. And these states still exist on the Indian map. There is a Koshal state, there's a Kashi, which is now Varanasi, known world over, and the Lichvi and the Mithila, which is also famous for its Maithili art. These are Ganarajyas of Mahabharata times, and there is a continuity. And we find at the death of Lord Mahavira, there was a funeral litigation arranged by 36 republics of the Vriji Confederation. That shows how they used to come together for different programs or different associations. The Lichavis were well-known republics who were governed by a council of 7,707 kings or rajas who were constitutional monarchs. The Sakha Republic was famous for giving the Buddha, Lord Buddha, who is known everywhere, Lord Buddha to the world, which had a parliament or parishad of 500 members with a president who was called king at that time. Some of the famous republics of the Buddhist era were also Vaishali, Mithila, which still exist as very big cities and very well-known cities on Indian map and the world around. They all had the assemblies which served as a legislative body. There was an executive and there were judicial functionaries of various sorts to implement their decisions. A single chief was elected out of these, who used to preside over them as the king of the assemblies, or as the Raja, as the name was called in Sanskrit or Hindi. In Sanskrit, we used to call him Nripa, but Raja is a well-known word around. It is said that all this was possible in ancient India because the people also led a democratic way of life, although political democracy did not exist in its modern form, but it was a democratic form nonetheless. Monarchy also was limited, and after the 6th century, these democratic organizations started somewhat declining. Kings and monarchs became more self-oriented or confined to their interests, which led to wars and which led to limitations much more on the democratic functioning of these kings. And then the Mohammedans came, and a different form of government, which was a monarchy of their sort, came up. And then the British came, which was also extension of British monarchy only, not British democracy. We all know that. However, after a freedom struggle in India, we had the first 1935 Act, which laid the foundation stone of the modern constitutional democracy or democratic rule. The Congress waged the struggle and remained in power with the British monarchs at that time, although it didn't go ahead for long. But 1946, when we got independent, we evolved a constitution under the leadership of Baba Saheb Ambedkar, who's called the father of this constitution. And the constitution is well known in the world that it is worked so well when most of our friends around submitted to either unconstitutional rules or bloody revolutions or the armies taking over, India has survived and sustained as a very strong democracy because the background was such, and we were used to this democratic way of life in our thinking, in our philosophy, which believes in Aham Brahma Asmi. I am also God in myself. Tat Tamasi, which means universal brotherhood is possible. Because you are that, I am that. Sarvam Khalu Idam Brahma. If everyone is part of that divinity, there's nothing to fight beyond certain issues. And that kept democracy strong and healthy in India. The democracy in modern India, as reflected in its constitution, is based on certain constitutional principles. The very first comes in the preamble of the Constitution, which says that every individual has his or her potentialities, worth, and dignity. There are certain inalienable rights of every individual, which our Constitution accepts, and decides to keep in the Constitution. The principle is also that everyone has the capacity to learn and manage his life with others. And that's what Dr. Ambedkar, the father of an Indian constitution, who kept democracy at the heart of the constitution and the form of government, said. Political democracy rests on 4 premises. 1, the individual is an end in himself. 2, that the individual has certain inalienable rights, which must be guaranteed to him by the constitution. And Indian constitution does that. 3, that the individual shall not be required to relinquish any of his constitutional rights as a condition precedent to the receipt of a privilege. And 4, that the state shall not delegate powers to private persons to govern others. That is the supremacy of the constitutional governance in India. And we also believe, as Dr. Ambedkar said, democracy is more than a political machine. It's even more than a social system. It is an attitude of mind or a philosophy of life, which is Sangachadvam, Samvadadvam, Samvomanansi, Janatam. That's what democracy, in fact, is. So, the modern Indian democracy believes that everyone has the capacity to learn and manage. And that is why I think Indian constitution was the first to give universal adult suffrage without limitations of property, limitations of gender, limitations of education or literacy. Because Dr. Ambedkar categorically said, and our Constituent Assembly believed, that individual has innate wisdom. Education may refine it, but every individual knows what is right and what is wrong, and therefore must have the right to decide, or the right to suffrage also, which is required in parliamentary democracy. And that's why universal adult franchise and the special privileges of gender are given in the constitution. I think we were the first constitution also to give or recognize a woman's right to motherhood by giving the maternity leave in the constitution itself, and made it a constitutional right, which has been extended now. We also believe in India that an individual must abide by the decisions of the majority, otherwise democracy cannot function. You can debate, you can contest, but ultimately, if a decision is taken by the majority, it must be abided by all others. That every individual should take part in making decisions or have a say in taking decisions. That's why universal adult suffrage and the right to vote one man, one vote became the guiding principle of our democracy in modern times. We also believe the principles beneath our democracy is that every individual must take part in the democratic process, and the process is interactive, and all individuals work towards commonly recognized ends or goals or objectives. That the control and direction of democratic action lies in the situation and not outside it. That's why consensus comes out of the discussion of enlightened minds. That democracy rests on individual opportunity as well as individual responsibility. So the seeds of responsible government, which is supposed to be a democratic government's, again, central idea, also have been recognized in India. After independence in India, we have had a democratic political system till now. The elections year after year have bore evidence or testimony to the democratic spirit. Not that we did not have attacks on democracy. We also had a brief spell during 1975 to 77, which is called the black period of Indian democracy, which is also called the emergency as provided in the Constitution of India. It was internal emergency when the political opponents were gagged. The press was also controlled. Every democratic institution was controlled or put behind bars. But in 2 years only, the people of India, who are otherwise thought to be illiterate or uneducated, recognized the worth of the democracy. And despite all things going very well and disciplined, people overthrew the regime which had controlled the fundamental rights and which had put the opponents behind bars. And after that, democracy has been thriving, surviving. The beauty of this democracy is that people go for options. They search for options. They're ready for options. They're ready for giving opportunity to new set of people, new parties, new leadership, which emerges out of these elections. And people of India have really always looked for better options after every elections. That's why from one dominant party regime, we have gone to multi-party system. Out of that multi-party system, we have a bipolar system now emerging in groupings of equally thinking or same kind of thinking among the or same political ideals of political parties, which come together, form alliances, and then form the government on common minimum agenda, which means common minimum set of principles and common minimum set of actions for the years to come. The system of democracy in India has been characterized by three elements. One, there is a high degree of autonomy. Autonomy for people, autonomy for organizations, autonomy for parties, autonomy for leaders, and also autonomy of all these put together. So individual is taken as a person who's thinking individual and therefore given the autonomy. Two, the economic agents and religious organizations are also, and the minorities are, free from political interference or control by and large. And three, competition between various orders does not endanger integration but helps it. That is our multiplicity. That is what is said, diverse unity in diversity in India. We welcome diversities, but we keep the unity inherent and keep the unity as a valuable principle. And last but not the least, democracy is a way of life, a way of living, which must pervade in all spheres of individual living. And that's why we say that political democracy can sustain. That's what Dr. Ambedkar said when presenting the Constitution to the Constituent Assembly. And Nehru said in his objectives resolution, and Mahatma Gandhi said in a different way called Swarajya. But they all meant to say was, The political democracy will survive only when there is democracy in social and economic life. And Indian experiments with democracy over the years have proved that democracy has been part of our thinking, part of our living. That's why we extend it to the world. We say, I am Nijah Paroveti Ganana Laghu Chetasa. This is mine and this is yours. It's a thinking of small hearted people. Udar Charita Nam Tu Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam. For large hearted people, the whole world is a family. And this family, the spirit of family, the care of family, and the care inherent in the family, and the goodness and welfareish moorings of a family are found in a democracy. The present leadership is trying to keep this democratic principle at the heart of political arrangements. And I would say the way we have tackled COVID or COVID 19, as we say, with people's involvement, with people's participation, with consultation with people, and the way people abided by what the political leadership gave them as a way of tackling the COVID 19 is a major contribute to the democratic consciousness of the people of India and democracy as a way of life. I would like to say thanks to a very dear friend or brother, I would say, Dr. Chaitanya Prakash Yogi ji, for giving me this opportunity, to Piyush Khandelwal ji for putting us together, to Srishti Harinarayan ji for inviting me and introducing me. And I would like to again extend my greetings from India to the entire world and to South Africa, which waged a very, very long struggle against the undemocratic, unconstitutional rule. And I wish to join the Republicans and the Democrats in South Africa in wishing them all a great democracy in the years to come. Thank you very much. Namaste to all.
Thank you so much, Professor Yadav, for your very deep and enlightening inputs on this occasion of International Day of Democracy. We surely did learn something from your deep insights. Thank you, ma'am.